Dorian Gray is a handsome young man who has a portrait of himself. Basil Hallward, who painted Dorian's portrait, bringing to worship Dorian's beautiful. He had feelings for Dorian, and fortunately he said to Gray that he was important in his life, but Dorian was indifferent to Basil's feeling. Lord Henry is a friend of the painter who met Dorian when Basil finished the portrait. The character influenced Gray about his beauty and handsome. One day, Basil showed them his final artwork of Dorian, and he put on it all his feelings. Then all people said that this portrait was the best artwork of Basil, and they suggest showing it in the most important events of art. But Basil didn't do this because they wanted to have all of Dorian for him. After that, Dorian Gray realized that he was handsome and until he saw his portrait. So Dorian made a wish because he wanted to be always young and beautiful as that picture. Time passed very fast and Dorian met a beautiful actress called Sybil Vane, who was acting at the theater like Juliet. The first person to know about her was Lord Henry. He thought that Dorian's description was absurd, so Dorian invited Henry and Basil to see her acting the next night. The theater show started, but the night was different because Sybil Vane was acting badly, and the audience was boring. After the show, Dorian came to Sybil and he said horrible things about that night. She felt sad and said to Dorian that she didn't want to act more, but Dorian was indifferent. When Dorian got home, he saw his portrait and he realized that his face on the picture had changed. The portrait showed his correct personality. Dorian couldn't understand what was happened, so that he remembered his wish immediately. He covered the picture and he felt sad. His thoughts changed and he wanted to marry Sybil Vane again. The next day, Lord Henry wrote a letter saying to Dorian that Sybil Vane was dead. Dorian received the letter, but he didn't read it. When Lord Henry came to Dorian's house, he found out that terrible notice. He could not believe it. Afterward, Basil came to Dorian's house, and the painter saw that his artwork had been covered. First, Basil thought that a servant did it, and Dorian said to him that he covered himself. This action enraged Basil, and he asked to Dorian what he had done it, but argued, and Basil said that he was going to show it in Paris. Thus, Dorian was angry and he decided to never to show his portrait. Finally, when Basil left the room, Dorian ordered to hide the portrait in an old schoolroom on the second floor. His servants said to Gray that the object was heavy. Many years passed, and one day Basil found Dorian in the street. They were walking, and the painter said to Dorian that he was going to take the train to Paris. Dorian invited him to his house, and Basil accepted because he had an extra time. Basil began to say all the rumors that he had heard about Dorian. Suddenly, he proposed to show Hallward his personal diary, because he wanted to clean his name. Basil accepted, and they went up the stairs to see Gray's diary. When they were in the schoolroom, Dorian showed his portrait, and Basil could see Dorian's correct face. Basil asked Dorian what had happened to his work, and Dorian began to tell him all the truth. Suddenly, Dorian began to feel hatred for Basil, and he saw a knife that he put some days ago. So that Dorian killed Basil. After that, Dorian took his personal objects and he left the house. Then he pretended to arrive at the house and he rang the bell. One of his servants opened the door and Dorian asked him about Basil's visit. The man only said that the painter was going to Paris, and finally he went to bed. The next day, Dorian visited Alan Campbell, an expert in signs and murders. Alan didn't want to help Dorian, but Mr. Gray convinced him to disappear Basil's body and all the evidence, so that Alan Campbell helped Dorian, and the young man was very grateful to him. Dorian played the piano and he reflected on all that he did. He wanted to be free again. Dorian went to the old schoolroom and saw his portrait and the knife, so he decided to kill the painter's work. But when he did it, the roles changed and Mr. Dorian Gray died with a knife in his heart. People could hear a horrible scream. The police rang the bell, and his servant was in shock. Finally, people found Dorian, but he was old and ugly, and his portrait showed him as young and beautiful as he was. Well, sometimes we prefer to do whatever to impress other people. Also, we reflected that when we did a bad thing, but it has to change because first we have to think about the consequences of all of our actions. I think that I have to be a less superficial person like Dorian Gray, because he preferred to be always young, but this condition changed him. Besides, when we make a mistake, we have to be responsible for it, because when we are hitting that mistake, we will be involved in more problems. Nutritionists cannot discriminate against people about their appearance, economic status, ways of thinking, pleasure, of preference for one or another food. We always have to be responsible for our actions, be honest, and we can argue like that characters in that novel. We must have to be neutral positions.